Hello, and welcome to the Autistic Me podcast. I am your host, Christopher Scott Wyatt. My guest for this episode is an autistic researcher and scholar in the fields of education, learning assessment, and psychometrics. Dr. Scott Frasard earned a PhD in adult education from the University of Georgia, where he also completed one of his master's degrees. Yet, his 26 years of adult education experience are not why I invited Scott to spend time with us. Although we could discuss our overlapping research interests for several hours, what fascinates me most about Scott is his passion for running and endurance athletics. Scott is a runner and triathlete. He is a certified race director and has organized several events benefiting nonprofits. As a director and vice president of the Ordinary Marathoner Foundation, Scott helped spearhead Running for Autism, a program to support aspiring runners. Welcome to the Autistic Me, Scott Frasard.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited about this.
Let's dive right in. How long have you been a serious runner?
I started running in 2012, and I would say that I really began getting serious about it in 2013.
Almost a decade, you have been doing serious, and by serious, I mean marathons, half marathons, triathlons. These are not for the faint of heart.
Especially the longer distances, you're absolutely correct.
How do you respond when someone inevitably says you're autistic and an athlete? How do you respond to that?
Thank you for recognizing that.
I like that. The challenge for autistics is people make a lot of assumptions about us.
They do.
And one of the diagnostic criteria has traditionally been a lack of spatial motor awareness and poor proprioception. Running, swimming, cycling all require a sense of balance. They require a sense of timing, rhythm. All of these things that we are told are diagnostic criteria for autism that clearly you can't be meeting if you're a successful runner. I assume you run to a certain internal pattern or beat?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think every runner, every triathlete has similar sort of things that happen to them when it comes to that. I don't know a single runner that hasn't tripped while they're out running or slipped their foot off the pedal or lost their balance somehow. So while it is something that autistics sometimes get typecast with, I don't think it prevents us just like it wouldn't prevent any other person.
How did you get interested in promoting running for other autistics?
So I was formally discovered as being autistic almost 2 years ago. And when we formed this nonprofit that I'm a part of last year, I wanted to be able to give back to this community that I'm now a part of and learning more about. Everything that I saw up to that point when it comes to helping autistics is all about helping them to do things in everyday life or to make things more convenient for them or other people around them or those sorts of things. Normalizing autistics in a world that's really not necessarily meant for them. I wanted to kind of take the focus off of that and give back to those that have been told or perceived that I can't do this. Introduce them to a sport that I love and that I think anybody can participate in and enjoy and do it for themselves, do it for the accomplishment, do it for the self-esteem, those sorts of things, and not to try to change who they are as a person. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully that kind of colors it a little bit better.
I know several people who do run half marathons and marathons, and one of the points that they bring up to me is that it's not about winning. They track their individual race times, their individual performances. Running, even though it's perceived as a competition, and it can be, there is inherently an individualized aspect to running. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that's more of the case. Certainly, there are people who are there to compete at a highest level, the elite athletes or the age group athletes that have aspirations or just the desire to compete and be best. But in large part, we're all there for the same reason, for the love of the sport, for the feelings that we get from participating.
Do you run on your own every day?
I used to. Lately, that has not been the case, but when I do run, it is almost exclusively by myself.
For an autistic who's afraid to participate because they don't want the social interaction, they want that time sort of in their mind, alone, clearing their head, running is then an appropriate activity for that private, solitary focus?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I say that whether I'm out 100% by myself and there's nobody around, or if I'm in a major race with thousands of other people, I can still be in my own world with my own thoughts and my own experiences, even though there's a bunch of people around me.
Complicating this, you are also a triathlete.
Yes.
My children have struggled with walking. Running obviously is more complicated than walking. Swimming has proved to be a challenge because, again, it's a highly coordinated activity. And cycling, we are still working on not crashing the bike randomly.
Right.
You have just taken what would be one difficult task for my children, and now there are three.
Yes.
So could you explain your experiences as a triathlete who is also autistic?
Maybe to provide a little bit of context, I remember as a kid, I loved going to the pool. I felt just as at home in the water, if not more so than on land. Can't explain why, just the way it was. So I enjoyed swimming, diving, just being in the water in general. So that kind of lent itself well to triathlons. Being in the water wasn't a problem. I did learn a couple things, though, as I started training, is there's a huge difference between swimming in a pool and swimming in open water, in a lake or a river or the ocean. And totally different sets of fears, different skills, especially when it comes to sighting. So that as an adult, I kind of had to learn how to do all of these things all over again.
So the swimming came naturally because you love water. Did you find any problems developing the rhythm that's required and that full body awareness that swimming in the open water requires?
A little. Probably one of the biggest coordinating things, which to date I still haven't done anything with, and I don't know that I should even, is a lot of competitive triathletes will do what they call bilateral breathing. They'll breathe on both sides or turning their heads to both sides of the body to take a breath. And they have usually a pattern of like every other stroke of doing that. Try as I may, I can only breathe to the left. If I breathe to the right, I'm likely to either take on water, breathe in water and choke, or stop swimming or whatever. I can't do it as much as I try. Even doing all the drills that they say should improve it, it just doesn't happen. I came to a point where, all right, I can work with that. I'll just breathe to the left and I'll adjust my swimming to accommodate.
And how has the cycling developed? Because unlike swimming, where it's a full body engaged in propelling, cycling is obviously much like running. It's heavily dependent on the legs. I'm thinking of Eric Heiden, who was a wonderful speed skater who became an outstanding cyclist. Obviously, for the speed skating fits cycling, running goes with cycling. And yet, I know many autistics who are adults who struggle on a bicycle.
I actually still have an element of cycling that I struggle with significantly. Actually, two things. One, I still struggle with hills, going up hills. And that may be due to my position on the bike. It may be due to how I develop the muscles necessary to go up a hill versus on a flat road or downhill. I can't explain it other than I have a hard time, and it's not just the pedaling part. It's probably some of the coordinating as well. The other part of it is, especially in the longer triathlons, positioning in the arrow position where you're face forward, your elbows are down on the handlebars versus your hands, and that's for me. It may be more fear than actual balance and coordination issues. I have this fear of if I stay in that position too long, I'm not going to be able to control the bike and I'm going to crash. And so I usually find myself sitting more upright or leaning forward, but still using my hands, which produces more drag and slows my speed down. In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter because I'm not out there to win.
So you just commented you're not out there to win. That goes back to that individualized racing or competing against yourself more than everyone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's more like the personal challenge, the personal satisfaction. If I can toe the start line and get across the finish line, that's a win in my book.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the stereotypes that you're overcoming and proving can be overcome. Because our daughters scissor walk, what used to be called pigeon toe as well, they each have different mobility issues that were part of being diagnosed as neurodiverse. The doctors have said, now be careful with sports, be careful with all of these things that are high risk. I too often hear, well, your autistic children might not belong on team sports. Maybe swimming's not the best thing for them. Maybe running won't work. How do you respond to this list of no's when my reaction is, okay, well, the girls might not be great at it, but they want to try it. Let's go do swimming. Let's go, get on the bike. So how do you respond to those? How in the world can you be out there telling autistics they can do these things?
It's very similar to what you just said, which is we don't know unless we try. And to me, there's no harm in trying. I like to live life by always questioning what it is we do. And in doing so, we're assured either we find out that the way we are doing things is correct and now we have evidence to support it, or B, we find a better way or a different way to do it. I apply that to what we're talking about here with sports is let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. And, especially if you're enjoying this, let's see if we can find ways that can help overcome some of those challenges. Maybe it's finding the right shoe that positions your feet in the right way to help that gait issue, or finding the right clothes that make you feel comfortable, or whatever the case is. I don't think it's productive just to say it's not going to work or you shouldn't do that. I'm like, why shouldn't we? And let's find a way to figure out how we can.
When I speak to parents and educators, I point out that one of the things they need to let go of is the concept that the autistic will fail, because that raises the question of how are you defining success and failure?
Yeah.
I don't know a single marathoner in my life who looks at finishing in the race as a failure. Crossing the line is their victory.
Yeah. And it may be just making it to the start line. A couple years ago, I had just gotten over a cold and I went to compete in a half Ironman. And, I was still having some issues related to my asthma. And I remember I got into the water for the first event, which is the swim. I didn't make it 50 yards before I was in a dead panic and I had to be pulled out of the water. But that didn't stop me from starting.
I also wonder if too many people in our lives assume we will be emotionally traumatized and harmed by this perceived failure. I watch children of all different abilities and capabilities, natural or otherwise, out playing youth soccer and having a great time. It seems to me it's often the parents and coaches who care about the wins and losses.
Yeah.
I don't think my children have been traumatized by not winning. I don't think that they even remember whether their season was a win or a loss.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. And I think in most things in life, it's about the experience. And it's not about who wins, who loses, whether or not I finished a race. If it's something you enjoy, do it. Just enjoy it, and not put those expectations on yourself, or have others put expectations on others for that very reason you just talked about. That I don't think there's really an upside to having an expectation of performance when that's not the goal of engaging in that activity.
Could you spend a little bit of time then explaining what running for autism means to you personally and why you are committed to this program?
I think first, again, even though I've been autistic all my life, almost 50 years, it hasn't been until the last year and a half that I've realized I'm autistic. That diagnosis answered so many questions that I had about myself, and I found that really refreshing. So this new community of mine, I want to give back. I consider myself, in a lot of respects, in a position of privilege in areas that others in the same community are not. And so I guess as my contribution, or one of my contributions, aside from being an advocate for us and saying, yes, we can, is to provide that opportunity to let's enjoy it. I get to I participate actively in the training during this so that I can see how things are going for that person, and to be able to share my experiences and help build their confidence, like you were talking about, and help them overcome their own perceived I can't do things if that's the case. So there's a lot of personal, I'm kind of paying it forward aspects to this just because I'm new to this community and I now understand some of the things that maybe I took for granted before.
Talking to physical therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, they have said that the youth sports can help the autistic individual gain that sense of rhythm, that sense of spatiomotor awareness, if properly trained. What is proper training?
Yes.
It's not enough, according to a OT or a PT, to go out and run. You have to do it properly, or you're reinforcing the very bad habits. And I really hate to call it a habit. We need to learn to run properly, to jog properly. It is not just your kid's going to put on some shoes and go running, or put on some cleats and play soccer. So there is a right and a wrong way. And you mentioned that you will help oversee that training process.
Not oversee it, but I do participate. We actually, as part of the program, hire a coach. And for this first participant, this coach was actually my coach when I became an Ironman and when I was training for that. So I knew her, trusted her, and having that coach, and I like what you call out, running isn't as simple as just going out and running. I guess fundamentally it is, but in order to do it and participate in the sport without hurting yourself and maybe growing to love it is a little more complex than that. And that coach is there to be able to help you improve your gait, monitor your speed, and provide those drills in progression to help build up your endurance, your strength, doing strength training, things like this. Things that we know from the running world and the physical therapy world and other related places to help us make sure that you're running in a way that isn't going to produce any sort of harm.
I certainly do understand when the doctors and experts say don't encourage your child to just go do things. They encourage us to work with an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a trainer. That doesn't mean that an autistic can't do these things, just as everyone else. And my argument to parents who get hesitant is, yes, I want to be careful and cautious, but even if my children were so-called neurotypical, I would want a good coach.
Yes, absolutely.
running is in any sport, or swimming, cycling, there is always the risk of injury. There is the need to understand proper training, proper conditioning. Could you explain how, as an autistic, you approach that training, that conditioning, and how it helps you self-regulate and be more aware of your needs?
Right at the moment, I'm not doing as much training. And as a result, I actually have to pay attention to my body so that I don't overexert myself. I know, for example, just the other day, I went out for a bike ride, and I knew after a few miles, okay, I need to slow my speed down because I'm exerting too much, and I'm going to end up stretching or tearing a muscle that I shouldn't.
So a greater self-awareness from being properly trained and conditioned, you now know some of your body's limits.
Absolutely. When it comes to running, for example, I learn about overpronating my feet and the problems that causes with when I run, or whether I use a heel strike or a toe strike approach. And when I do feel a twinge, maybe a sharp pain in my ankle, or when I've got Morton's neuropathy, which involves an impinged nerve in my foot. And when I start to feel that tingle, instead of pushing through because I need to complete X number of miles in this training run, that allows me to evaluate the situation and say, all right, is this a problem? And maybe I should just walk, or I need to stop and I need to ice it, elevate it, and we'll try it again in a couple days. So if I didn't have that training, I may be inclined to just push through. I'm not going to achieve my goal of finishing this marathon if I don't do this training. And that just causes much more problems in the long run.
That makes me think of gymnastics, where a number of U.S. gymnasts have commented that what we used to prize, which was pushing through an injury, a hairline fracture, a tendon that has been damaged, now we know if you want a long career, a successful career in any sport, part of that is knowing when to say no.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so being self-aware of your body, you're able to say, this hurts, something isn't right, I should stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
And that awareness is part of the training?
Absolutely. Again, before a coach, I would just go forth with what I laid out as my plan. With the coach, I know when to make adjustments, and I know that, it's okay to not do this today, or it's okay to stop in the middle of my training plan for the day, or I can adjust. My ankle hurts from a bad run yesterday, so maybe I'll just swim today instead, something less impact. So none of that I would have been able to do if I didn't have a proper coach.
As a runner and triathlete, you do go to events.
Yes.
And you travel. That, again, falls under the category of potential autistic nightmare.
Yes.
So even though it's a small part of being an athlete, the reality is that the sports that you love do require travel and adjusting to new environments and new locations. So do you go ahead of time to test run? How do you get used to this new space when anything new throws me off for days?
Exactly. I remember the first 5K event that I ever did. I had a whole list of unknowns. How do I, something as simple as, what's the course like? Where are the hills? Where are the turns? Even though it'll be marked and there's thousands of other people, to other things like, how do people drink water from the aid station? I need to practice that. So I remember with my first 5K, my wife and I actually went out and I ran the course. That way I kind of knew what to expect, because, that expectancy is a big deal for us. And I actually did that for other events too. And when I graduated up to doing a half Ironman, after I did a lot of my training and I got to a certain level of, okay, I think I'm ready. A few weeks before the event, again, with my wife's support, I went out and I did the actual course of that event here in Austin. And I actually learned something additional, not only, where the turns are on the bike course, for example, but I also learned after the bike, I was toast. I hit my wall and I could not do the run. And that actually helped me to go, okay, what kind of adjustments do I need to make because race day is just a couple weeks away? When it comes to traveling distances, that part hasn't really bothered me that much. The last decade or more of my professional career, I traveled for work. So while there are things like learning where to go when I get to the airport, where security, let me go make sure I'm there early enough to go find my gate, and then I can go get something to eat, all that kind of stuff. And then on race day, I actually feel, for me personally, and I know this isn't for everybody, but I actually feel that energy that I get from other people that are there doing the same thing that I love. And while I don't have a whole lot of interaction with people, occasionally I'll say hello and strike up a conversation with one or maybe two people. But for the most part, I just soak up that energy, and that actually helps drive that desire to really, really do as well as I can.
I would like to refer people to the Ordinary Marathoner Foundation and the resources that you offer. Could you explain what the Ordinary Marathoner Foundation does and how people might locate the website and other information?
The Ordinary Marathoner Foundation, we raise money and put on programs to help introduce or reintroduce people to running and other multi-sport events. People who are just ordinary people, hence the name, Ordinary Marathoner. I'm not an elite athlete. I'll never compete at that level. And almost everyone who's engaged with us or part of us is in the same boat. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy the sport. What we do is help not only encourage people to participate in running or multi-sport events, but provide them access to help them out. We have this program running for autism, and we set a participant up. We're going to be expanding the program in the future, but we provide them shoes, socks, nutrition belts, registration for an event, the coaching. But we got other programs that benefit blind athletes or veterans, people who want to participate, but for whatever reason, whether they feel like they have a physical limitation or a financial limitation or just some other limitation that they otherwise feel they can't participate, we say, we believe you can, because we're not elite athletes. That most people are not, but that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. As far as how to find us, go to our website. It's ordinarymarathonerfoundation.org. And you'll get to see all about our organization, how we came about, but also all the programs that we offer as well.
Your work as a race director has been to benefit nonprofits, and you've done some of those, if I understand correctly, virtually.
Yes. One of our key events that we put on every year with the Ordinary Marathoner Foundation is what we call a virtual marathon. It happens every May, and this happens to be a 10-day event where people who participate, we have a social media presence as well, and people who participate engage in other athletes who are participating, and whether they run a half mile or even walk a half mile or run a full marathon or longer, we're there to encourage everyone, to talk about our successes, our achievements, that kind of thing. And it has really become a huge event of encouragement and bringing others into the running sport. We've been able to help so many people participate that never thought they could run a marathon. So that's kind of what we're all about, is helping people just enjoy the sport that we love so much.
I really appreciate that you're out there showing that sports isn't about being the elite athlete. I think too many parents and too many coaches focus on achievements that are external to the person.
Right.
And it's ironic that everyone assumes that the autistics are somehow overly intrinsic, and yet I think the real enjoyment of sports should be intrinsic. I hope my kids enjoy it just to be out there doing their best, whatever their best is.
I completely agree. Like for me, when I'm out there running, there's this thing, you've probably heard of it, called the runner's high. It absolutely exists. And it's this state of almost a trance-like state to where you're just out there, you're in the moment, you're running with your thoughts, you're enjoying the whatever environment you're running in, and nothing else seems to matter. You're completely stress-free. You just feel this incredible sense of everything is right in the world.
I want to thank Dr. Scott Frasard for joining us on the Autistic Me podcast. Scott and I are obviously educated and we have achieved a lot. And people look at that and say, oh, well, that's proof that autistics can do these things career-wise or academically. And yet I think we often overlook something that is as important, which is taking care of our minds and bodies. It is nice that people come up to me and say, you're an inspiration or whatever. I don't deny that. That's okay. I don't want to be just that, though. What I want parents and caregivers of autistics to know is that meaning doesn't come from those things. The thing that gives me meaning some days is being on my bike riding.
Yes.
Or in my garden, or so many other things. And I want parents and caregivers to understand that Scott and I, yes, we're both doctor, but that's not what gives us meaning. And I hope that what you take from this episode is you follow what Scott has offered you. Look up the ordinary marathoner. You do not have to be an elite athlete. You do not have to be dedicated to 20 miles a day, 7 days a week. That's not what this is about. The ordinary marathoner is a reminder you can exercise and find that place inside of you.
Yes.
Scott, do you have some final thoughts for us?
As I think about our conversation and what you just said in particular, I don't know how to put it other than to put it very bluntly, is when it comes to the internal happiness, don't worry about what other people think. Do what makes you happy.
And for some people, that might be running or cycling. Other people, it might be the garden. For some of us, it's both.
Yes.
I do know, I will share that Scott and I both share a passion for our yards.
Yes, we do. It's therapeutic.
Exactly. And I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to remind parents, caregivers, spouses, partners, that as autistics, we, just like everyone else, can find meaning in things that aren't expected. Too many people think I only find meaning in the academic, in those exercises of the mind, when really where I'm probably the happiest is on a bike in the mountains.
Absolutely.
And if that's my happiness, that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't measure yourself by somebody else's yardstick.
That is the best advice we can give to everybody about their children, their spouses, their partners. Don't measure us by external factors. Measure us by, do we know what makes us happy? And are we receiving the supports to follow our happiness?
Absolutely. I think that's great.
It is an honor, again, to have had Scott Frasard of the Ordinary Marathoner on the Autistic Me podcast. Remember, you've met two of us this episode, and we are not all alike. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.